Hi, welcome to the Online Jewelry Academy. I'm John Ahr and I'm your instructor. Today I'm going to show you a really easy way to cast silver. We're not going to do lost wax casting, we're going to do Delft clay casting. The big difference between the two is that when you use lost wax casting techniques, your model is melted or burned away. In Delft clay casting, you get to hang on to that model. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to use a material similar to this to create an object like this one. Now, as long as the object that you want to mold and cast will fit into your mold frame, you can make virtually anything. I've made a wide variety of pieces here, including a pair of men's cufflinks. So let me clear this away and let's get started. Let me show you the tools that you're going to need for this project. First, you're going to need a surface to heat the crucible on. Now you want something that's going to deflect heat from your tabletop, and do not use a nice table because you might actually burn a spot on it. Now, in addition to this, you're going to need a cookie sheet with an edge to it, like the one that I have here. We're also going to be working with the Delft clay material itself, and when you're not working with it, be sure to store it in an airtight container. In addition to these, we're going to need something to poke with. Could be anything. You could saw the end off a nail and have a headless nail that you poke with. Or it could be a piece of shell-formed copper from our shell forming video. You'll also need a little paring knife, something to scrape with. Again, it could be anything. Here I have a small sheet of copper. We need a work hammer to pack the mold. Now, when I say a work hammer, I mean don't use one of your polished hammers. Just use something that you would hit a nail with. You'll need your crucible. Now this crucible has been prepared to receive metal and to be ready to heat up that metal. It's been seasoned with something called casting flux, and here it is right here. This is basically borax. So if you're on a tight budget, you could use something like boraxo powder for washing your hands. That has enough borax in it that it will actually work. Now, the material that goes into the crucible to be cast is this. It's sterling silver casting grain. Now, in addition to that, I may be throwing in some scrapped sterling silver pieces. Now, to get these things to melt quickly, I want to have as much surface area as possible. In other words, I want the pieces to be really small. So sometimes, in order to get the scrap to melt quickly, I need a pair of shears to cut it up into smaller pieces. But if you don't have a pair of shears, a heavy-duty pair of scissors might work out just fine. Now, when you buy the Delft clay, it will come with a two-part aluminum mold. Now, the one thing that I want to point out about this two-part mold is that it has a registration line on it. These need to be matched up as you're working, otherwise your project will not turn out properly. The other thing that I need to point out to you is that each half has a cutout on the inside. I don't know if you can see that very well or not, but that cutout enables the mold to hold the clay without spilling it out. There's a male and a female, and they fit nicely together, and you should have the registration match up as you work. Okay, one other thing that you're definitely going to need is something to chop up the Delft clay with. Now, you could use just a piece of sheet metal, but believe me, your hand will thank you if you get something that has a handle on it. So at the very least, if all you have is a little piece of sheet metal, put a rag in your hand to simulate this type of a handle as you chop. Otherwise, you might end up with a cut palm. Okay, a couple other things. You need a bowl of water. You never submerge this mold. You splash it, and you need a big surface area on your water in order to splash it. Now, to melt the material in the crucible, you're going to need a heat source. If you check our other video that explains how to choose the right torch for your studio, you can see the differences, but I would recommend either using an acetylene torch or one like this. This one is fueled with MAP gas. And last but not least, don't forget to protect your eyes and your body. You should wear an apron and stand up when you do this. You don't want to sit down when you work with hot metal because you could end up with a lap of molten metal and that wouldn't feel good at all. All right, let me clear this tabletop and I'll show you the step-by-step process for working with the Delft clay. I've set up the table so that we can pack the mold for casting. Now, here's our mold. It's an aluminum framework that has a registration mark on the top and the bottom half. And we have a male and a female end. The male, of course, fitting into the female, and a ring inside that will hold the clay. All right, I want to take the male portion of this and I want to turn it upside down. So I'm going to set this aside and move over here and prepare the clay. Now when you dump out your Delft clay onto your edged cookie sheet, you take your chopper and you chop into it. Now chop it up as much as you can, or as much as you can stand to do, because the more you chop it up, the more chance you have of compacting it nice and tight. So just chop it in every direction, and basically you want to just spread it out over the entire surface of your cookie sheet. Okay, so I've got all of the big lumps and bumps out of mine. I'll just move some of it out of the way, and then I'm going to take my upside down male half of the frame and put it in the tray. Now what I want to do is I'm going to grab a handful, and I'm going to go 1, squish into that mold, 2, overpack it and squish it, and 3, just for good measure, turn it into an ugly muffin. There it is. Wouldn't eat that. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to pick up my work hammer. We're going to hit kind of lightly, and we're going to start around the edge, and you're just going to pack the clay down. So just make a circle, go around the mold, packing it down, and you want to leave a bump in the middle. When you get that bump, go boom. And what that does is that compresses the clay down and out so that it's secured into the frame. Then you can just pack it. Okay. Next, I'm going to take my chopper and I'm going to just scrape the top of the mold. Okay, so what I end up with is a top that's nice and smooth and an inside surface that's nice and smooth as well. Alright, so let's set this aside here and let me show you what I'm going to mold. I've got a piece of tail light from a car that was in an accident. I'm sure the person who lost his tail light wasn't very happy, but I'm happy to have it because it's a really cool texture. Alright, so what I want to do to make sure that this doesn't get stuck in the clay, which is just a little bit sticky, is I'm going to take a paintbrush and I'm going to just lightly dust my model. I don't want to try and make it nice and thick or anything. I just want to give it a little bit of a dusting. And this will make it so that the clay can't stick to it. Now, when you do something like this, notice I'm working way over here and not over here. I don't want this in there. It'll ruin your Delft clay. Okay, so this thing's got a light dusting of baby powder on it now, or talcum powder. And I'm going to center it on the inside surface of the lower half of our mold frame. And then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a push. Now I want to work it into the Delft clay, but I don't really need for it to sink all the way in. If it only goes about halfway, that's great. It means that I'll end up with a seam on the outer edge, which is really easy to file away. Okay, so this piece is now firmly secured in the bottom half of our mold. Okay, one thing. Let's take this handy dandy bit of baby powder and give this whole surface just a really light dusting. What this will do is it will keep the top half of the mold from sticking to the bottom half of the mold, and we're going to get a cleaner impression. So you can see I'm not using very much. I just want to help the mold not stick to itself. And if you have a little bit of excess, you can just go and you're good. Okay, so I'm setting that aside. Now I'm going to take the top half. I found the registration line of the top half, and now I look at the bottom half, and there's the one on the bottom, and I'm going to line them up. just like that. It's very important that you work with the registration line. Okay, so now I'm going to clear space again. Put my mold frame back into the pan. If I have anything left over like this from the last time, just give it a little bit of a chop to break it up. And then you're ready to go. 1, stuff that mold full of it. 2, overpack it. And 3, just in case you need a little more. Again, you got a really ugly muffin. Okay, don't eat that. Don't let the dog near it. Okay, light hammering around the edge. Okay, and we're working towards our center again. There's our mound. Give it a nice big wrap. Okay, that mold is really well packed. Now we're going to scrape off the top of this. And there we go. We've got a nice full mold. And you notice none of the clay is falling out of it. It's good. Okay, I do not want to twist these apart. I want to pull them apart. If I twisted, I would screw up the inside mold. So we just open it up. And voila! I have 2 halves of a 2-part mold that are perfectly packed and ready to go. Okay, I'm going to set the top down. I'm going to pick up a paring knife and I'm going to push just lightly on my model. And I'm going to push on it from several directions just to loosen it up. And so it's loose enough that it fell into my hand. You don't want to have to pry it out because you'll distort the mold. Okay, I can set my model away because I may have to do it again. It's an imperfect process. Alright, so now what I want to do is I'm going to take the top and I'm going to pick up something pokey, could be anything, and I'm going to just poke right in the middle of this piece, and I'm going to go kind of slow motion right through that and pull it all the way through. And if you look at the side that I pulled it out from, it looks like a bullet went through it, like an exit wound. All right, so what I want to do next is pick up the paring knife again, and on the outside that looks like the exit wound, I'm just going to remove the excess clay. Now what I want to do is kind of dip into this hole that I cut and just cut myself a funnel. What the funnel does is it guides the molten metal into the mold, and it just makes it easier for you to get the metal into the thing, because otherwise you could miss when you're pouring. Now don't cut the funnel all the way out to the edge. You don't want your molten metal to stick to your mold frame. Okay, when you get to the right depth, what you want to do is pick up some tool, any tool, and take out any debris. You can drop it through the opening, pass it through a couple of times, just smooth things out, make sure no little crumbs are still in there, because any little crumb or any little bit of debris that falls into the mold while you're casting, that debris occupies space that your metal should occupy, so you'll get an incomplete casting. Okay, if you've got problems like this on the inside, where little pieces are sticking up, you could either just smooth them down with your finger, or what I like to do sometimes is I'll pick up my model and I'll just drop my model back into that surface, give it a little tap, and then take my pokey thing and drop it back out again. Okay, now I'm just going to make sure that I got all the debris in the casting channel cleared up. Okay, this is looking really good. It's nice and clean, no debris in it. I've got my registration line here, my registration line here, and I'm going to just marry them together. This is now a mold that's ready for casting. Well, I don't want to do it in the studio because it gets a little smoky, so I'm going to meet you outside and cast outside. Okay, we've moved outside and I've set up for Delft Clay casting. I have my Delft Clay mold positioned close to my Crucible
which is on a heat-resistant surface. I have the handle leveled with something underneath so that I can make sure that this isn't going to spill out. I have my sterling silver casting grain, my sterling silver scrap, my casting flux, and a torch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to approximate the size of the void inside the mold. So we'll say that's about as much silver as I'm going to need to fill the void. So I'll add that to the crucible. But I need a little extra to add weight so gravity will push it into the mold. So I'm going to take some of my scrap and I'm going to add that to the mix. About 50% or 50-50 blend is good. Okay, so what I'll do next is as I heat the material, I'll draw a little bit of the impurities out of the silver by adding the casting flux a pinch at a time. Okay, let me set this up exactly where I want it. Now I'm ready to go. So the mold has been filled and it's smoking a little bit. To stop the clay from smoking, I'm going to quickly just splash it with a little bit of water. Don't submerge your mold. You don't want it to rumble in the water and have the clay disperse into the water. And don't get it on your crucible. There we go. So I'll take this back into the studio and open it up and see what we got.
We're back in the studio now, ready to do our Delft Clay casting reveal. Okay, so I've got my mold ready to be opened, and I brought my little sample here of what I molded just to remind you of what we're shooting for. Now, when you do this, it's always a good idea to have some paper down to catch the ash and things like that that you'll want to dispose of. You may want some water to clean off your casting, and you need a receptacle to put the unused Delft clay back into so you can recycle it. Okay, remember, we don't want to twist, we just want to give it a pull. Okay, and you can see there's the bottom half that's burned, and here's our casting. Now, the best way to remove this is to just take the butt end of a knife and push it out. Okay, so you can see a lot of the clay came out with it and some of it's burned. What you would want to do is just cut away this burnt portion, just scrape it away, because it acts like baby powder or talcum powder. It keeps the clay from sticking to itself. So you'll have a little bit of waste, but you can recycle most of it. Okay, so let's take this off. Maybe give it a little rinse. Okay, it didn't cast 100% of the model the way we wanted it to. I have a little deficit in one corner, and if we look at the mold where the burn pattern is, I can see where it is right there. Now, if you're doing a very detailed casting, you would want to cut vent holes. On one like this, I normally would just forget about it because they're usually not necessary. But if you're doing a detailed casting, let me show you how you would tackle it. All you need to do would be to cut channels from the areas where you're worried that you might lose detail. Now, once you've cut these channels, you can see I've cut them away from the corners, you would take a wire and just pass the wire through the mold at each of these little channel ends. Now, after you've done this, you just want to go back and make sure that you've cleared debris from the void area and from the channels. So I would knock that off and then just come back and make sure that the channels are clear. Now what these little channels will do is they will allow the air inside of the mold to escape as the silver enters the mold. And that action actually will draw the silver to those detail areas. I hope that you have fun with the Delft Clay, and check out our other videos and products on the onlinejewelryacademy.com. Thanks for watching.